Hello everybody, this is Simon from the future here. I'm recording this in March. When I first released this episode, I was honestly expecting a backlash to it in many respects, but it was been far and away the most popular episode I've ever released. So I went away and I created a short course, took me a month to write, for triathletes looking to lose body fat. There is over 2 hours of video, there are 12,000 words of text, so I've put quite a lot into it, everything I know on the subject. A link to the course is available in the show notes. However, I want to start moving on with the episode and I'll cover this more in the outro. So sit back and enjoy. Hello everybody, Happy New Year and welcome to another episode of the Age Group Triathlon podcast. This week I'm going to be discussing a topic which is very relevant for this time of year. I'm going to be talking about fat loss and triathlon. Now, normally when I'm writing an article or a piece for social media, I'll always talk about fat loss. Because what we really want to be doing if we're looking to lower our weight is we want to be losing body fat as opposed to muscle mass or bone density or anything like that. We don't want to lose weight at all costs. We want to be losing the right kind of weight in a sustainable way. And for many people, the phrase fat loss is a lot less triggering and relevant than weight loss. However, I'm going to be talking about this subject for the duration of the podcast, so chances are I probably will refer to weight loss and weight a good few times. If you are recovering or suffering from an eating disorder, I would maybe find another podcast to listen to. Honestly, this isn't really designed for you. The reason I'm recording this podcast is for those triathletes who have got into the sport and they want to lose weight as part of the journey, and that is a totally reasonable thing to do. I tend to do quite a bit of writing, helping people understand that weight isn't the be-all and end-all of triathlon performance. However, if you have a high percentage of body fat for your age and gender, and you would like to lose some weight and use triathlon as a vehicle for that, having someone like me tell you you don't need to worry about losing weight isn't really helpful. That message really is directed at those who are already performing at a relatively decent level and I want to help them understand that weight isn't the be-all and end-all of triathlon performance. So, I have created this podcast, I'm creating this podcast, to help talk you through the principles of fat loss. Now, the reason that I am releasing this podcast now is because it's a time of year that a number of people will want to sort of trim back maybe some of the excesses from Christmas. However, it's also the ideal time for existing triathletes who maybe are already performing at a pretty decent level, but you know that maybe you're carrying sort of 5 kilos more than you'd like to. This is the time of year where you want to focus on losing some excess body fat. And the reason for that is that if we want to lose weight, we need to be in a calorific deficit, and that is something that is very difficult to do if you're approaching your race. Some people will get into the last sort of 8 weeks of their training and go, right, this is time for me to hit my race weight. And this race weight really isn't a figure that's backed up by science. Normally it's a number they've plucked out of the air. And they don't eat much in that time to help them get down to what they see to be a competitive weight. That has a really negative impact on your training. Those last 8 weeks are crucial for your performance at your big race. And if you're under-fueling your sessions, you're not going to perform in that vital bit of training, and you will be losing 2 or 3 kilos at the expense of fantastic training sessions, which would make you much faster than losing a bit of weight would. So, the best time to look to aim to be in a calorific deficit is this time of year, when the training load is low. The intensity should be low. For the most part, at least we still need some intensity. But this is the time where we can afford to be in a bit of a calorific deficit without it having such a negative impact on our training and our performance. Now, this is a subject which not an awful lot of coaches really want to touch on, and with relatively good reason. It is the kind of subject that if you get it wrong, it can come across incredibly badly. However, I've received, without wanting to sound, too full of myself, I've received some very good feedback from people on the writing that I've done surrounding the subject. And unlike a number of other coaches and podcasters out there, I don't have sponsors to upset. I don't have an employer who could discipline me if there is a little bit of backlash to this. I'm also recording this that just because a lot of triathlon coaches will steer clear of this subject doesn't mean that newly qualified 18-year-old personal trainers on TikTok and Instagram with hundreds of thousands of followers won't give this subject the same level of respect. So I'd rather, as an individual who is a certified nutrition coach with the National Association of Sports Medicine, I'd rather have a candid, carefully worded and constructed discussion with you about this than you get your information from someone who is coming at it from probably a very different angle to you. So let's start by, if we're talking about fat loss or weight management, what is the first thing that comes to our mind? Well, for a lot of people, it could be a stock photo of a beautifully lit woman in her 30s holding a smoothie or a salad, smiling while she eats it. And people will see that and they go, oh, that is health, that is good nutrition. That is how you look like she does. And but this is a very simplistic way to look at things. Look, if you enjoy smoothies, if you enjoy salads, I'm not going to stop you from enjoying them. They're healthy. They are dense in vitamins and minerals. It's never something I discourage someone from eating. But we have to look at it from a much broader perspective. Especially as athletes, we're not there simply looking to eat as little as we can to lose as much weight as we can. We're trying to balance fueling our training sessions with being in a calorific deficit. And that is a very complex subject. A lot of personal trainers, those who are perhaps less worldly wise, shall I say, they will harp on about how weight loss is all about calories in, calories out. That's what it comes down to. If you are burning more calories than you're eating, you will lose weight. And there is definitely some truth to that. However, what they miss is a huge amount of nuance. They miss the whole psychological side of weight loss. They miss the social side of eating with people, friends and family events. There is a whole myriad of factors that they don't consider. So I'm going to take a little bit of a deep dive into, not just the physiological side of things, but also how you can manage your diet whilst in situations that it can be challenging to achieve this. I'm also going to be talking about why it is much more difficult for people who are already very overweight, maybe even clinically obese, how it is very hard for them to get started on this journey, and ways for you to help get around that and break through what may feel like a glass ceiling that you've tried time and time again to break through. Before we get started into the meat and potatoes at least, I wanted to talk about a client of mine. So a chap called Neil got in touch with me last January, and he was struggling to understand why he was struggling to lose body fat. He had quite a high body fat percentage for a triathlete doing the volume of training that he was. And despite the fact that he understood the principles that I'm going to share with you today, he just couldn't quite get his head around it. He couldn't understand why it was that his weight was stuck where it was. So we had a nutrition consultation, and off the back of that, he decided to come onto my coaching program. So I refunded him the consultation, and we started working together. And within the first 6 weeks, we lost 5 kilograms. We saw a 4.1% drop in body fat and only lost 100 grams of muscle mass in the process. So I think we can all agree that's a pretty good success story. And I'm going to be talking you through a lot of the strategies that we used. Now, some of you may be wondering, hang on a minute, if you're charging him for a consultation and coaching, why are you giving this information away for free? And the reason for that is that the information isn't the important part of coaching. The information is readily available. You can go on the internet and you can find all the things that I'm going to discuss today completely free. I'm condensing and putting them into a podcast in the hope that at least one of you will drop me an email and say, hey Simon, I would actually like a coaching session to help me understand where it is that I'm going wrong. Because the value in the coaching isn't simply information, it's about understanding somebody's lifestyle, understanding somebody's diet, their working patterns, their vices, their habits, really starting to get down into the nitty-gritty of it all and really understand the person rather than just going through these very basic scientific principles that I'm going to go through. One last big disclaimer is that the contents of this podcast are aimed for those who aren't suffering with any medical conditions that will affect the body's willingness to retain body fat. We're talking about conditions such as polycystic ovary syndrome, having thyroid issues, or just sort of general imbalances with hormones which can affect this. However, if you feel that you are genuinely suffering with a condition that will affect your ability to lose weight, is to get a medical diagnosis. Don't self-diagnose yourself with one of these just because you're struggling to lose weight. It is difficult, in some cases very difficult. I believe these can vary in severity. It can be very difficult to manage your weight, but it can be done, for most people at least, with the right approach if you're working with a suitably qualified medical profession who can help you. I'm not that professional, so if you do have one of these conditions, if you do get a diagnosis, then you need to listen to somebody who knows what they're talking about on the issue. Now, let's get stuck in by talking about the laws of thermodynamics. Now, the laws of thermodynamics are pretty basic principles within the world of physics, and they teach us that if energy expenditure is greater than energy consumed, that our body will start tapping into its fat reserves to keep itself alive. This is a pretty basic principle that for the vast majority of people is going to hold true. The body wants to retain body fat for prolonged periods in case of famine. You know, it thinks with the ability that we have to just go down to the supermarket and eat whatever we want, whenever we want, or get a pizza delivered. You know, our body thinks it's living in boom times, and it's simply building up body fat reserves so that if we encounter a famine, then we're going to be able to live for longer than those who don't have those reserves. However, a big misconception that people have regarding diet and weight loss is the impact that exercise has. Weight loss is about 80% diet, maybe even higher in some cases. If I were to go out for a run for about an hour at a relatively easy pace, then I'd be burning maybe sort of 200, 250 calories for that hour. Some people may come away from that and go, oh, well, I can eat whatever I want coming off of the back of that. It's not really the case, though. Now, this may seem a little mean, and I apologise, I'm just using it as an anonymous example. I was in the gym about 12, 13 years ago, and I saw someone who was sat on an exercise bike, cycling at a very slow pace while eating a Mars bar. And they obviously had it in their head that the exercise that they were doing was going to burn off that Mars bar as they were eating it. And unfortunately, that's just not really the case. So for us to understand how much this kind of 200, 250 calories an hour sort of plays out into our day, we need to look at a few things. So the first thing we need to look at is base metabolic rate, also known as BMR. And this is the number of calories that your body needs just to keep itself alive. So for men, this is normally around 2,000 to 2,500, and for women, it's between 1,500 and 2,000. Now, this is if I were to wake up one day and I were to go, oh, I'm just going to lie here in bed and I'm going to binge watch television without eating anything, without getting up, without doing anything of note. That is the number of calories that my body would need to maintain its level of body fat and general processes. So we're talking about energy that was required to keep my heart beating, to keep myself breathing, keep my urine sterile, to maintain my body temperature. It's normally the single largest cause of energy a day, is simply keeping you alive. Now, as you'll have probably noticed, both of those windows, they could be about 500 calories either way. And I'm actually an outlier. For me, my BMR is closer to 1,850 calories a day. So this is really important for you to know and to understand this if you want to sort of reverse engineer and understand just how much of a difference 200 calories is going to make to your day. So ways that you can measure your BMR, the sort of the cheapest, easiest way to do it is that most gyms do tend to come with a machine now, which will track a lot of your sort of your body composition. It will give you an estimation of BMR, but muscle mass, bone density, water levels, all of that. These aren't super accurate, but they are better than not knowing anything at all. You can pay to go to a clinic to get it all analysed professionally, but honestly, as your BMR is going to change, as you gain muscle mass, as you do more exercise, as you become more active, I'm not sure this is necessarily the best use of time or money. So if we have an idea of our base metabolic rate, the next thing we might want to think about is what's known as NEAT, and that is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And essentially, this is any activity which isn't structured exercise. So it could be walking the dog, going up and down the stairs, if you work in a manual job, anything required there. This is not nearly as significant as the base metabolic rate when it comes to burning calories. However, it is the reason that people say, oh, try taking the stairs instead of the elevator, and get off of the bus or stop early and walk, because this really adds up over the day. You can burn a surprising amount of calories outside of structured exercise. In fact, in many cases, it can end up being more calories burned through the day via these activities than an exercise class itself. We then have the thermic effect of food, or TEF. And this looks at the amount of energy that your body needs to digest the food that you give it. Now, obviously, the more food that you eat, the more energy will need to be spent on this. And also, the harder it is to break down the food that you give your body, the more calories will be spent on digesting it. This generally accounts for around about 10% of calories per day, and it's relatively fixed. There's not an enormous amount that we can do to impact this meaningfully, but it's another part of the picture. So then we come around to the calories that are burned during structured exercise. So any time that you put on your sports kit and head out the door. So as stated previously, it may not be an enormous amount. If we are saying we have a base metabolic rate of 2,000 calories for the sake of simplicity, and say another 500 calories that we burn, plus another 10% that we add on for digestion, we might be looking at about 2,750 calories a day for the sake of argument. I could have got my maths wrong. Apologise if you're better at mental arithmetic than I am. And then that sort of 250 calories that we burn through exercise, it's not even 10% of the calories that we burn through the day. Which I think is why a number of people get frustrated with weight loss, because if they go and they do a session at the gym and they spend a lot of time between sets and they're only actually using the weight machines or whatever exercise it is that they're doing for about sort of 20 minutes, they can then go away and get themselves a box of donuts on the way home as a treat. And it just, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. It's not quite that easy. However, what does become more impactful is if you are either doing a very intense workout or you're doing a very long workout. So if I head out for 6 hours instead of heading out for 2 hours, I'm going to be burning a lot more calories than if I am just working out for an hour. Of course, if you are training for 6 hours, you're going to be needing to take on some food whilst you're doing that training, because you need to be able to maintain the carbohydrate levels for your body to keep moving itself. However, at the end of the day, if you are training for longer, it makes it a lot easier for you to manage your weight. On the intensity part, there is a reason that high intensity interval training, or HIIT, is so popular with people who are looking to lose weight, is because during the really high intensity sections, you are going to be burning a lot more calories than if you're just going out doing long, slow training. However, this does pose a problem to us as triathletes. A lot of our training needs to be done at a relatively low intensity because we're trying to develop our aerobic system, which is mainly developed at a lower intensity, and because we are going to be sort of training 5-6 days a week, maybe even multiple sessions during a day. We can't afford for all our sessions to be hard. We're going to burn out so quickly. So it's a difficult balance between weight loss and moving sort of towards the kind of training you want to be doing for your own triathlon success, which I think is why sort of more triathletes struggle with this than you might think. Now, let's look at an extreme example. Let's look at professional cyclists riding the Tour de France. Now, these may eat between 4,000 to 9,000 calories a day. Now, the reason this number varies so much is it depends on the rider and the stage that they're riding. If they get away in the breakaway and they're working hard all day, or if they are a general classification rider ahead of a really big mountain stage where they're planning a big attack, they may need towards the upper end of that number of calories to fuel their effort and to replace the energy that they've lost. Whereas if they are a domestique who is riding a flat stage, they're going to be riding a relatively low intensity pretty much all day. It's a day for the sprinters, and unless they're part of a sprint team, they may just be turning over the pedals. And yeah, they're still out on the bike for several hours, but they don't need quite as many calories as those who are having an enormous day out on the bike. But even though they are taking on all of these calories, they normally find themselves sort of losing weight and fitness and sort of wasting away a little bit throughout the Tour de France. Because it's just impossible for the body to replace all of the nutrients that it's burning just simply through food. It's an unsustainable level of physical exertion. And this is why it is so much easier for people who are already a healthy weight and who are physically fit to manage their weight than someone who might just be starting out on a weight loss journey. If you are somebody who is clinically obese, you are not going to be able to exercise for an hour. You may get out of breath after 20 minutes. Your ability to burn calories is going to be severely impacted. Whereas using myself as an example, if I did wake up one day and think, oh, you know what, I really want to, find myself in a calorific deficit today, I can hop on my bike and I can ride for hours and hours and hours and know that I'm unlikely to be able to replace all the calories that I have burned in that day. Simply due to the sheer volume of time that I spent on the bike. However, if you don't have the fitness to do that in the first place, it becomes more difficult. And that's why it's really difficult to get started. And it's about keeping the faith. It's about seeing those small improvements, building up the time that you can spend training. So my recommendation is that if you are in this position, or you know someone who is, they train a bit like a triathlete in some ways, in that they have some sessions which are lower intensity, and this is very hard for people new to fitness to get their head around. They think they need to go as hard as they can all the time to get a good workout, in inverted commas, whatever that means. So it's going, okay, your challenge is to be on that stationary bike for an hour. And if you're going to be on that stationary bike for an hour, you know you've got to ride easy. And yeah, it's going to feel stupidly easy, and you may feel embarrassed or self-conscious for the first 20 minutes. But it's going to start to add up towards the end of that hour. And extending the amount of time that somebody can exercise for is going to have a huge effect on their ability to burn calories through exercise. But also they need to have those high intensity days where they're going to be burning a lot more calories than they do during those steady state workouts. So having that polarized approach is going to work for fat loss as well, and not just sitting in that kind of comfortably hard, makes me feel good area. Now, these workouts can feel really good when you're doing them. If you are going out and you're running your standard 30-minute loop as fast as you can, trying to see how many other runners you can overtake at your local park. The issue with this is that it's not really going to help you run for longer. It's not progressive as such, because generally speaking, you'll be running the same loop over and over, trying to see how fast you can get and improve your times on Strava. Alternatively, you're not really getting the fitness benefits or the calorific burning benefits that you get from that really high intensity in exercise either. So there's a time and place for these workouts. If somebody's getting ready for a 70.3 distance triathlon, maybe even Ironman, depending on their level, I may say, hey, look, go out and ride your bike as hard as you can for 2 hours, 3 hours, or 4 hours. It's really miserable going out and riding as hard as you can for that period of time. There is a time and place for it, but we do need to, if we make that every run because it feels good, then we're not going to achieve our goals. Next up, we're going to have a look at sort of how much weight will improve performance. And now I've talked about this quite a lot in other podcasts. If you go have a look back, I think it's episode 5, the triathlon myth busting one that I did. I talk about how it's really not the be all and end all, the weight that you are. Yes, it will help with the run, but it can also place you a disadvantage on the bike because you just won't be able to put out the same level of raw power that athletes who are bigger, stronger than you can. So it is a little bit of a dodgy one. Now, if an athlete came to me and said, I'm going to lose a bit more weight at this time of year as opposed to in race season, unless they were really light, I would say I wouldn't have a problem with that. Okay, cool. Like if that's something you want to focus on, I support that. Let's find out how to do that. But I would never, ever sit an athlete down and say, look, I think you could stand to lose a few kilos. I can't think of anything worse. If your coach ever says that to you, or has ever said that to you, you need to find a new coach yesterday. Not only is that a really horrible thing to say, very personal, it's also lazy coaching. If an athlete isn't getting the results they want, what are you going to say to them? Are you going to say, oh, look, I hear you, let's try and figure out why this has happened, let's try and create a plan, let's build more trust in the relationship, let's have some weekly meetings, let's really try to get to the bottom of this, try new things, and try and get you out of this? Or do you just turn around and say, well, you can stand to lose a few kilos? I mean, come on. The real key, if you do want to lose weight, as a triathlete though, is to make sure that you do so without losing muscle mass. Now, this is one of the biggest arguments against lighter athletes being faster, is that they just likely won't have the same level of muscle mass that stronger athletes do. And if you're an athlete who comes in around about the 80 kilo mark, so, as far as triathletes go, I'm not saying you're big, but you're going to be stronger on the bike than somebody who is myself, someone in the 50s. What you don't want to do is say, hey, you know what, I'm going to get myself down to 75. And in doing so, lose a lot of your muscle mass in the process. Because the body doesn't want to carry muscle mass. This is one of the reasons that the body doesn't want to gain muscle mass in the first place, is that a pound of muscle requires 6 calories a day for the body to be able to maintain that muscle mass. Whereas a pound of body fat is closer to 3-4 calories a day. And this is a big difference. So the body is saying, well, hang on a minute, why would I have this muscle which doesn't provide me really with much energy reserves and requires energy to maintain each day, when I could have body fat that I can burn if we are in shortage of food? The body is going to err towards body fat rather than muscle. So when the body starts finding itself in a calorific deficit and it goes, okay, we need to burn some of these fat stores that we've been keeping, the muscle mass isn't off the table. The way that we can reduce this, I mean, if you remember the case study at the start of the episode with Neil, he lost 100 grams of muscle mass during that weight loss, and you're always going to lose a bit. The way that you prevent that from being a catastrophic loss of muscle mass is by ensuring that you're eating a high level of protein during your weight loss phase. The same can actually be said for bone density. This is something that if you find yourself in, it has to be sort of a large calorific deficit and you're not getting enough calcium and vitamin D. This is something that you can start to lose, and it's what can cause osteoporosis in some people. So just because you're losing weight doesn't mean that you just eat whatever you can, just go for the sort of the lowest calorie option. you do really need to pay attention to the nutrients that you're having. Now, this is a huge rabbit hole that I haven't got time to go down today, but just remember, it is the quality of the foods that you're eating as much as it is the calorific numbers. So there's more to this, as I said at the start, than simply calories in, calories out, even if that is ultimately what's going to trigger the fat loss. So how do we measure our progress? Well, the simple solution is to step on a pair of bathroom scales. And yeah, you can do worse than that. My preference would be that if you have a gym that has a machine that will give you an accurate reading, where you hold the handles and it does that biometric scan, and it spits out some numbers of body fat percentage and water retention rates, all of that. That would be ideal, but not everybody has access to those. So, if you only have a pair of bathroom scales, please don't weigh yourself every morning on these bathroom scales. That is a really good way to end up disheartened. The reason for this is that your weight will fluctuate a lot from day to day. So it could be something as simple as, when's the last time that you went to the toilet? You could be carrying an extra kilo of waste with you. That's why they often recommend that if you're going to weigh yourself, you do so first thing in the morning after using the toilet, so that you're always weighing at the same time of day, and you have some regularity there. But there's more to that as well. If you have a monthly cycle, in the first week of your cycle, the follicular phase, your body is going to be retaining more water, which can make you bloated, which can, of course, result in a higher result on the scale. And even things such as what you had for dinner last night. If you had a relatively light dinner that has been digested and has made its way through the digestive system, that's one thing. If you had something really heavy and fatty that's going to take longer to digest, that could be sitting around in your colon for longer. So what I don't want you to do is get into a routine of weighing yourself and go, oh no, I put on 50 grams compared to yesterday. What am I doing wrong? Okay, because you are looking at very small details, which it's easy to become sort of obsessed over with for the first week or so if you do start to see improvements. And then as soon as you start to see that weight tick up a little bit again, there can be that tendency to go, oh my god, it's a waste of time, I can't believe I'm putting weight back on. Because something that you need to understand when it comes to weight loss is that there's no such thing as getting back in shape. Some people seem to think this time of year that if they blitz January, work out really hard, then they can drop a dress size, a few kilos, whatever their goal is, and then they can go back to normal and they'll have that new figure of theirs. Well, that really isn't the case at all. I mean, if somebody ran marathons and they were very good at running marathons around the 3-4 hour mark, if they took a year away from training, they're going to lose fitness. In the same way that if you have a phase, like a real focused weight loss phase, and then you achieve your goal weight, and then you go back to eating whatever you want again, of course that weight's going to go back on. If you're engaging on a health and fitness journey, which I highly recommend you do, you need to accept that you're in it for the long run. This isn't a short-term solution. This isn't a quick fix. This isn't something that you can spend a few months, a year on, and then you'll get yourself to that weight that you want to be, and then you can just continue with life as you were previously. This is a real lifestyle change, and so sustainability has to be at the heart of things, and you have to accept that your weight is going to fluctuate throughout the rest of your life. So how do we track our progress then if we are going to, because if we weigh ourselves every day, if we're going to obsess over a few grams here, a few grams there, how is it that we can track our weight? Well, what I recommend is if you weigh yourself once, twice, maximum 3 times a week, and you can then track that, and you can see over time the patterns. If you track it every single day, not only do you have that kind of that mental battle of the disappointment of not seeing the progress that you were hoping for, maybe because you had unrealistic expectations. But you also have a data set which is really noisy. If you look at the past 3 months and you have 180 data points, that those lines can be jumping all over the place. Whereas if you only weigh yourself less regularly, it's going to be easier to understand trends. If you are looking at, say, January to March, and that you weighed in roughly kind of 89, 88, and then by the end of March you're weighing in at around sort of 83, 84, and it's still fluctuating, you can still see a downward trend there, and you see, oh, okay, like what I can see, what I'm doing is working. It's something that most people, even if you're tracking body fat percentage, even if you have some fancy scales that can measure that, which honestly, I mean, they're not that good. I'm not saying don't do it, just like don't put a lot of trust in them. Unless you are going somewhere regularly and having expensive professional scans done, where you can sit in a chamber or you can get some special tests done to give yourself a really exact number. It's very difficult to get a really good picture, really good feeling. However, I think what the best thing that somebody can do to be able to track their progress, rather than looking at the weight number, because again, weight doesn't tell us if we're gaining muscle mass, it doesn't tell us if we're losing body fat, it doesn't tell us if it's just undigested food, it's a very blunt measurement. The single best way to see if you're losing weight from the areas you want to lose weight from is how your clothes feel. When I did a couple of years ago, I did a big focus of max strength training in the gym, and I was taking on lots of protein, I was doing lots of heavy lifting, I was really going for it to try and develop my leg strength. And when I went out cycling, I found that my bib tights were sitting quite tight on my legs. And that was like, well, hang on a minute, I don't remember them being this tight. And that was as good a sign as any to me that the training was working and that my muscles were getting stronger. Of course, I didn't want them to get bigger per se, but it can be a byproduct of sorts. Of that max strength work, you'd expect to see a little bit of a hypertrophy response. So when you're trying to lose weight, if you find yourself having to pull your trousers up, or that your t-shirt has got a little bit more space in it as you move around in it, that's as good a sign as any that things are moving in the right direction. So I think at this point we've got a relatively good understanding of the things that we need to do if we want to lose weight. The difficulty is the practical side of it, let's be honest. If it was simply that easy, then there wouldn't be nearly as many overweight people as there are. So, the biggest issue that we're grappling with weight loss is hunger. So hunger is actually a hormonal response to the release of a hormone called ghrelin, which is when your body feels that it hasn't got enough nutrients, enough nutrition, it will release this hormone which triggers the hunger response in you. It's relatively simple, and as a result, if we can learn how to prevent the release of this hormone, if we can not necessarily trick our body, but work with our body to reduce the hunger response, that's only going to be a good thing. There are actually a number of levers that we have that we can pull, that we can help our body reduce that immediate hunger response. And one of the best ways to go about it is to increase your protein intake. Now, as endurance athletes, we should be eating a good level of protein anyway. This is something I generally tell people to aim for about 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight a day. The science recommends about 0.9. But if you aim for 0.9 and you get 0.7, 0.8, that's a problem. If you aim for 1.2, but you end up with 1 or 1.1, that's no big problem because we're still sat above that sort of recognised 0.9 level. But it is something that if we focus on getting good quality protein in our diets, that will reduce the hunger response. Now, for those of you that eat meat, compare your satiety level if you were to eat a steak relative to if you were to eat the same amount of calories in Haribo, then you're going to feel a lot fuller for longer. Now, part of this is the body going, yes, we need protein, this is essential, it's not as easy to come by as carbohydrate and fat, so thank you for giving us this protein. Another part of it is the reason I used Haribo is that it is almost pure glucose. So this relates to something called the GI index. So this relates to all carbohydrates. It's somewhere on the GI index. And if you have something such as glucose, something sugary, then it's going to give you a real short burst of energy, but that burst of energy is going to run out relatively quickly. If you give a 4-year-old a tube of Smarties, they're going to run laps around the house, out in the garden, and then they're going to fall asleep. And this is how sugar works. It gives you that nice energy boost, and then you fall off that cliff. If you are eating carbohydrates, which I highly recommend you do, highly recommend you do, I'll touch on that more in a bit, then you want to be favouring, for the purposes of satiety at least, GI, foods that are lower GI. So we're talking about foods such as sweet potatoes, sort of generally vegetables are towards that end of the GI index, looking for, say, like wholemeal rice instead of white rice. Generally, the less refined, the less processed the carbohydrate is. Broadly speaking, the lower it is on that GI index, and will leave you feeling fuller for longer. The next one I'm going to look at is micronutrient density. So this is another way that we can reduce our body's hunger response. Now, our body knows that for it to maintain its critical functions, it needs a good variety of vitamins and minerals. And the best way to get all the vitamins and minerals that you need, broadly speaking, this is a gross oversimplification, but it does help, is if you eat a large variety of fruits and vegetables. And one of the tips that people give is eat the rainbow. So you want to make sure that you're having a good variety of fruit and veg. You're not simply having potatoes and green beans. You know, you might be having sweet potato, you might be having peppers, you might be having sort of a wide variety of fruits of different colours, because this will help us get the widest variety of vitamins and minerals without us having to kind of obsess and keep count of all of these things. So our body is going to be asking for these. Now, if I were to go to McDonald's for lunch and I were to get myself a Big Mac, I were to get myself a large fries and a Coke, how many nutrients is my body getting from that? Now, there is some protein that's going to be coming from the Big Mac, and there is going to be some simple carbohydrates, so high on the GI index, coming from the bread and also from the fries. So, I'm not saying that it doesn't have any nutrients in it whatsoever, but the micronutrient density in there is really quite low. I'm afraid that the sad little piece of lettuce that they stick in the Big Mac doesn't really count towards much in the way of vitamins and minerals. So, if we have this meal and we feel sort of satiated, the body goes, thank you for the food, thank you for the protein, thank you for the carbohydrates, and I get on with my day. Within sort of 90 minutes to a couple of hours, I don't know about you, I haven't had McDonald's for several years myself now, but when I did eat it, and sort of fast food generally, I'd often find myself feeling hungry again within a couple of hours. And that is your body going, hang on a minute, mate. You didn't really give us the full deal there, did you? You've cheated us out of the vitamins and minerals that we need. So what does it do? It triggers the hunger response. So if somebody goes, oh, okay, well, I'm still hungry. Right, I'll guess I'll have some crisps then. And the body goes, thank you for the carbohydrates. And then 20 minutes later it goes, no, you're not understanding. That's not what we wanted. And so it triggers the hunger response again. And this is a way that people can end up struggling to control their appetite because they're not actually giving the body what it needs. The hunger response it's a very blunt instrument. It's going, I need more nutrients. It's not necessarily always very good at telling you what kind of nutrients that you need. So if you've been eating lots of high fat, carbohydrate-based foods, then you are going to find yourself feeling hungrier than if you're able to eat meals that have a much wider range of micronutrients in there. Again, micronutrients being those vitamins and minerals. Right, now we're going to move on to a little bit of myth busting. So I'm going to look at some of the common misconceptions that come with fat loss and that a lot of people tend to believe. The first one is regarding fad diets. So I refer to a fad diet as being anything that looks beyond, sort of a simple calorific deficit. So we're looking at the keto diet, South Beach diet, paleo diet, Atkins diet, anything like that, which is, the idea is that if you follow these simple steps, you'll lose weight, often through claiming some sort of slightly dubious claim about why it's more effective than traditional methods. Now, to make it abundantly clear, I'm not saying that these diets don't work, because they do. I think we all know somebody who has proudly stated that they or their friend or their family member has lost a load of weight on the keto diet, or they feel so much better since they've gone onto the carnivore diet. Anything like that, these kind of restrictive diets. So why is it that I'm saying that, that they don't work? Well, they do, but the reason they work is they create a calorific deficit. And the way that they do that, it depends from the diet to diet. But often, the sole reason for this is that for one of the first times in their life, they're actually thinking about what's on their plate, rather than just having what they feel like. Rather than helping themselves to that third slice of Domino's pizza. They're stepping back and they're thinking about, I need to cut down on that, or I need to have none of that, or less of that. And we simply lose weight through that. If we use an example of someone who says, oh, I've lost 10 kilos in a few months on the keto diet, it's amazing. Okay, that's great. Now, if somebody, and I'm happy for them, but if somebody is on the keto diet, and they previously sat down and ate an entire family-sized bag of Doritos every night in front of the television, do we think that they're losing weight because of some kind of magic that the diet triggers? Or do you think that they're losing that weight because they simply reduce carbohydrate and thus that kind of excessive consumption in the evenings, and they're paying a lot more attention to what is it they're eating, and because they're eating less in the way of high GI foods, they're also feeling more satiated. Touching on the keto diet, it has been one of the more popular ones in recent years, I think it's dying out a little bit now, is the idea of the state of ketosis that your body can move into, that can help burn off all of this body fat. And yes, that is a thing. It is definitely a diet that has been recommended to people with certain health conditions. But a lot of these diets, they tend to describe themselves as being scientifically proven. And the problem with that is the way that science works. If you have 100 studies that say, we have found no link between A and B, but one study comes out that says, oh, if you take A, you'll see a reduction in B, then there's nothing to stop a individual or a company from taking that scientific study and waving it about, sending out emails to all of their followers on social media to say, look at this scientific study that proves this. Is it done in bad faith? Yes. Does it work? Yes, because a lot of people don't understand really sort of how science works. It could be that the study was done on a very small group of people. It could be that the study wasn't carried out in a particularly sort of well-structured way, but they've got the result that supports their product that they're trying to sell. And so they go, it's scientifically proven. And there's no real sort of governing body that can turn around to someone and say, no, you're misleading people, because they're simply sharing the results of a scientific paper. But yet anything that claims to work in a specifically tricky scientific way, the real reason that you're losing weight on these diets is again through a calorific deficit. The other reason that you should avoid these sort of fad diets, in my opinion, is that none of them are really long-term sustainable. If you're cutting out an entire macronutrient from your diet that really restricts what it is that you can eat, can you really do that for the rest of your life? You may feel that you can in the first few weeks when you're seeing those results, but when your weight starts to plateau, of course, we can't all be losing weight indefinitely. Is that really the way that you want to live your life? And if you then come off of that diet and you go back to eating without much thought, you might then put the weight on and then go back to that diet at the start of next year because that really helped you last time. It's not how it works. That's not a sustainable sort of approach to dieting. It's what they call sort of yo-yo dieting, where somebody diets hard, then eats what they want, then put the weight back on, they diet hard. The way that you want to be able to maintain that figure that you want is by finding a sustainable way, sort of changing your eating habits and just becoming a bit smarter with what it is that you're eating. The next myth I'm going to talk about is having salads for lunch. Now, this is something that gets pushed an awful lot by those in sort of the dieting space, which is an industry that I hate with a passion, as you can probably tell. But they tend, it is something they point people in the direction of, well, a salad, it's healthy, right? I mean, yeah, I'm not going to disagree. I like eating salads. The issue is that you get with it is that if somebody, say, has dinner the evening before a day and they eat their dinner and they wake up in the morning and they have their breakfast, which will sort of normally be sort of a few hundred calories. And then it comes to lunchtime and they've made themselves a salad. And this is quite often an undressed salad that they'll have. So, they have sort of lettuce, cucumber, maybe some onion, tomato, and they'll eat the salad and they'll feel nice and they'll feel healthy. And their body after the salad is going to go, oh yes, thank you for all of those micronutrients. That's what we needed. But it's the opposite problem to a McDonald's. Not just picking on McDonald's here, it's just because it's the world's most famous fast food outlet. Same for any of those kind of low nutrient fast food restaurants. But your body is going to go after some time, but hang on a minute, where was the calories? Because we haven't had anything more that you've only given us 500 calories to survive the last 18 hours, and we're looking for closer to 2,000. And then the person who's had the salad for lunch, their stomach really starts grumbling around 2 p.m, 2:30. You think, well, I've just had my lunch. So what do they do in this situation? Well, they can't make it through the working day with their stomach doing backflips. So they have a snack. Did they bring a snack with them? No, they didn't, because they didn't expect to be hungry, because they were on a diet and they were having salad for lunch. So instead, their snack is whatever they can get their hands on, which chances are, unless you work somewhere which is a large corporation which has a good selection of food, it may be something that comes out of the vending machine or from the corner shop. Which, let's be honest, if we're looking to manage our weight, probably, judging by most corner shops and vending machines, isn't going to be the ideal solution for us. They may even need another snack later on in the afternoon to keep themselves going until they get home and they can finally make their dinner, which it may be they eat a normal portion of dinner. It may be that they go overboard with the portion size because they're so hungry. But, okay, they may be in a calorific deficit at the end of that day, still, because they had that salad for lunch. They may not. The snacks and a larger dinner may have offset that. But when they wake up the next day, the body's going to be saying, no, you still owe us a lot. Now, the body doesn't mind being in a smaller calorific deficit so much, but if you're going to leave it in a 400-500 calorie deficit, it's going to come calling the next day. It's not something you just go to sleep and switch everything off and know that everything will be better in the morning. It's something that you need to keep on top of, that moves from day to day, from week to week. So here's my recommendation. I'm not saying don't have salads for lunch, because I think it's a good meal. But if you are going to have a salad for lunch, then yes, have all of your vegetables in there, but also maybe throw in some croutons, throw in some protein, maybe some chicken or some beans if you're vegan, and a little bit of dressing so that you have a bit of flavour, a little bit of fat in it. It makes it a little bit more enjoyable to eat. And you may say, well, what's the point in that then? I was having a salad to be healthy. Well, if your normal go-to is a trip down to Greg's or to get a Cornish pasty, something which, you may be looking at about 700 calories from that meal, and instead you have a salad which comes in at 350, 400 calories, but leaves you feeling just as full and actually a bit better about your body than what it is that you'd normally get, you're still winning. And this is the perfection trap that people fall into, where they feel that if they are going to be on a diet, if they're going to be losing weight, they need to do everything the right way. And that's just not the case. Life is full of compromises, and your diet is going to be full of compromises as well. In fact, I try to get people, we may talk about, okay, so if we want to aim for like a 200 or 300 calorific deficit a day, because we think that's kind of a sustainable way to lose weight, I don't expect somebody to hit that calorific deficit every single day, because that's not just realistic. However, if they are in a calorific deficit for say 5 days of the week, but they're in a small surplus for 2 days of the week, you're still in an overall deficit. You don't need to beat yourself up because you had maybe sort of a little bit of excess on one day. You had some treats that somebody brought into the office. It doesn't undo all the hard progress. You need to zoom out rather than focusing and obsessing over every meal every day. Step back, look at the bigger picture, and don't obsess over those details. Another common misconception is that a vegan diet is healthier. And so a lot of people will switch to a vegan diet because they think they'll lose weight and be a lot healthier. Now, again, I'm not saying that a vegan diet can't be healthier, but for the most part, the way that most people go about it, at least those who might be trying veganuary, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody say that word, then it's very easy to fall down a lot of traps and to do it very wrong. The first mistake that a lot of people make is not getting enough protein from a vegan diet. And again, this is something that for the first sort of 48 hours or so of the diet, you wouldn't really notice that much. But after some time, your body's going to go, hang on a minute, this is something that we need a bit more of. Generally speaking, vegans tend to get most of their protein through beans and pulses, sometimes tofu. And yeah, that's a perfectly sustainable way to get your protein, but what we call the bioavailability of protein is lower in vegetable sources than it is from animal sources, so you do need to eat more of a volume of that to be able to keep those levels high. And it's also very easy to eat a vegan diet that is high in processed foods. Now, a lot of vegan options, especially for people who don't do an awful lot of cooking from scratch, can actually be really highly processed. And now I'm not jumping on the bandwagon of all processed foods are the work of the devil and everything you cook needs to be from scratch. That's just not realistic, let's be honest. However, if we can reduce the amount of processed foods in our diet, that probably is going to make us feel better. And a lot of vegan options, if I go to the supermarket, there may be a whole section, a whole fridge or freezer of vegan options. Have a look at them and see how many of them are relatively highly processed. And a bigger issue than the lack of protein or sort of the more processed nature of many vegan foods is vitamin B12 deficiency. Now, this is the only vitamin that we can't get from any form of fruit or vegetable. And as a result, you need to take B12 supplements, normally orally as tablets, if you want to maintain good health. If you neglect your B12 intake, I think that a relatively high proportion of the population could use B12 in their diet, even those who are omnivorous or maybe even carnivores. I doubt carnivores, to be honest, but you never know. You do need to make sure that you're getting enough of this. If you neglect this, if you don't supplement B12, it's going to make you feel very unwell. A vegan diet can be done well in a way that is healthy and sustainable, but it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of money sometimes, a lot of focus. It can be quite I think demanding is probably the wrong word to use, but it's not the easiest way to live your life. So if you are going to try a vegan diet, I'm not saying don't do it, but it does take work to do it properly. So don't assume that by cutting out all animal products in your life that you're immediately going to feel healthier and lose a lot of weight. So another myth that we touched on earlier is the idea of muscle burning through fat, and that if you get stronger, that's really going to increase your base metabolic rate, which is going to burn more calories every day, which means that fat's just going to fall off if you do enough strength work. I'm afraid that the principle is sound. The reality is that it's not going to be that successful. Each kilogram of muscle burns 15 calories a day. So if you were to put on 10 kilograms of muscle mass, that's an extra 150 calories per day that you're burning. Now, this could end up being the difference between you being in a calorie deficit or not. But when you consider the amount of energy that somebody who is working out needs to sort of lifting weights, the amount of nutrition they need each day, that 150 isn't going to be massively significant. So you can't simply build muscle and wait for the weight to fall off. You do need to continue to pay attention to what it is that you're eating, which goes back to my previous point in that, if you start on this journey, you need to make sure that it's something you're in for the long run, and you need to continuously be reviewing what it is that you're eating and make sure that you're still making the right choices. The next myth I'm going to look at is that you need to track your food to lose weight. Now, this is a subject which causes a lot of issues, understandably, with people, because the idea of having to scan the barcodes of what it is that they're eating and weigh everything out, it sounds like a lot of work, and that's because it is. Okay, if you're somebody who has all the time in the world to prepare meals, maybe you could do that, but chances are you don't. And especially if you are cooking for more than one person, this becomes quite difficult to get it done accurately. So do you need to track your food to lose weight? Absolutely not. Can it help? Yes, it can. There's no getting around that. Now for triathletes, I don't recommend that they track their food forever. Some choose to, and that's completely up to them. Some coaches I know sort of ask their athletes to track everything that they're eating and send that information to them, which is a little bit micromanaging to me. I'm not sure how healthy that is. I know that obviously it works for some people, but what I recommend athletes do when we're talking about nutrition is that they track their food for like 1 or 2 weeks. And the reason for this is you may be really surprised at where the calories in your diet are actually coming from. To use an example, when I was studying for my level 3 personal training certificate, one of the tasks was that I had to ask somebody to create a food diary. So I asked my partner if she wouldn't mind doing this for me for, I think it was a week. Yeah, no, it's no problem. And we went through and we looked at all the food that we were eating, and something really took us by surprise. I remember we noticed that the egg noodles from one supermarket were really high in calories, and that if we went to another supermarket and got another brand of egg noodles that was just about the same price, is about 200 calories lower per portion. And this is the kind of thing that if you just buy something out of habit and chuck it in the pan and don't really think about it, that you never really twig onto. So I definitely don't recommend that triathletes go down the path of weighing everything all the time, because once you start that sort of, when do you step off? I think that sort of 2 week mark is just enough for you to, over a 2 week period, you're probably going to cook a lot of the meals that you have in heavy rotation during that period, and you can start to understand where you're getting the best bang for your buck. If you have a meal that isn't really one of your favourites, but it turns out is actually really calorific and is high in saturated fats, is it really worth it? Whereas it may be there are other meals that you cook that you really like, and it turns out, they tick all the right boxes of what you're looking for, and maybe you should have more of them in future. The biggest danger with tracking your food is the possibility that it can lead to disordered eating, or maybe even a full-blown eating disorder. So if you are worried, if you feel that you or maybe someone that you live with might be a little bit prone to this, I recommend against that. It's probably not worth going down that rabbit hole if you are really worried that it might start. It might be the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche. Instead, if you'd rather avoid that, simply clean up your diet for sort of a month or so, and again, using the methods I've explained previously, sort of track some progress over time, see how you feel, and base it on that instead. Next up, we're going to talk about snacks, and the idea that snacks are bad, you should never have snacks, which I disagree with quite passionately, to be honest. One, because I like snacks, but also because they are a useful tool. Now, if we look at sort of somebody's day, so if we say they're a triathlete, so let's say they get up at 5:30, they have something before training. Not everybody should necessarily if they find it hard to digest, but either before or after training, they have something to eat. And then turns out it was a relatively big session, or a hard session for them, so they find themselves having their lunch maybe a little earlier than they normally would, assuming they're in a job that allows them to do that. And after they have their lunch, they get to about 2:30, 3, and their stomach starts doing backflips. Now, at this point, if you know you're not going to have your dinner until 6, you can't sit there with your stomach turning itself inside out for the rest of the day. You need to have something to eat. Now, you have two choices here. One, you could accept the fact that you're hungry and that you can't ignore this hunger and that you need to have a snack, you need to have something to eat. And it needs to be something that is going to get you all the way until 6 o'clock. So that could be a big snack, ideally high in protein to make us feel fuller for longer. But we are looking at, sort of 1, maybe 200 calories in this snack. So that's something that's really going to see us through. The alternative is we say, oh, well, yeah, I am getting hungry, so I think I'm going to have a Kit Kat. And then half an hour later, you think, oh, I think I'm going to get some crisps from the vending machine. And then this starts to snowball. And you start grazing on unhealthy foods. I mean, I don't like the term unhealthy foods, realistically, because I think that, just because something has sugar in it doesn't immediately make it unhealthy. We as athletes do need sugars. However, for our day-to-day diet, we don't necessarily want to be getting loads of carbohydrates high on the GI index throughout the day. So yeah, we could either go for these calorific snacks that aren't going to really give us much nutrients, or we can say, you know what, I'm going to have a big snack. And to be able to do that can be quite difficult, because you do need to have these larger snacks on hand in your workplace for you to dip into on days where you feel like that. Now, the flip side to this is if you were working and you got to around about 4:30 and you start to feel hungry and you start looking into your snack drawer. Given the fact that it's 4:30, given the fact that you are on a weight loss journey, could you make it until dinner time? Is this the kind of hunger that you can ignore, that you can work through, or you may be just hungry because you're a little bit bored, you're feeling a little bit restless, and you fancy a little snacky snack. You know, we've all been there. We've all eaten things that we didn't need to, that don't actually bring us a huge amount of joy or fulfillment, but just because they were there. So sometimes if you are feeling snackish, just stop and think, hang on a minute, is this really what I want right now? Is this really what I need? On the subject of hunger, I never want a triathlete to feel absolutely famished, absolutely starving, can't think straight, not being any use to anyone, because they just haven't got enough calories. Okay, that isn't productive, that isn't what we want. What we're looking for instead is we're looking to be able to manage, a low level of hunger at certain times in the day when we know that we're going to be having a meal soon. The only possible exception to this, and it depends on the individual, is if it gets to bedtime and you're thinking to yourself, you know what, I'm feeling pretty hungry, is you might want to try going to sleep and see if you can. If that hunger's keeping you up, get up, go have something to eat. But if you think that you can, if you think you don't necessarily need to have anything and that you can take something on before tomorrow morning's session, assuming you have a session in the morning, that might be a time where you think to yourself, well, if I do want to lose a little bit of this around the middle, is this a time for me to, rather than have a snack, just go to bed and see how it goes? If you do that, next morning's training, I recommend you take something with you, some carbohydrate to have on hand, just in case you do crash really hard. Next up, let's look at why people really struggle, even if they're doing everything right, even if they're tracking all of their food. Why is that everything says they should be in a calorific deficit, they should be losing weight, but they're not. One of these reasons could be due to an undiagnosed health condition, sort of one of the ones that I listed at the start. I know people talk about genetics making it harder to lose weight. It's not something that's ever really been proved. But if you have really been banging your head against a wall, if you can't understand why nothing's happening, again, it might be worth a trip to your GP just to rule that out. If somebody is tracking all of their food, but they're not seeing a change in their weight, despite the fact that that app says that they should, it could be that they are forgetting to track everything they eat. Now, this may not necessarily be sort of an oversight of, I completely forgot to log that snack that I had there. There's a good chance that it's something much simpler. I mean, the most common one is people forgetting to track the fats that they cook food in. So if you're making yourself a stir fry, you might track all of the veg, all of the protein, everything that goes into the stir fry, but forget to add the oil, as an example. Or if you have yourself some potatoes with some fresh veg, you might forget to track the butter that you put over your veg. Now, this may not sound significant, but it could be something, because they're highly calorific, those fats, it may be that even a small amount is just what's tipping you over, preventing you from being in a suitable calorific deficit for weight loss. A more likely reason, however, is that somebody's base metabolic rate is inaccurate. Now, it could be that you measured it using something that wasn't really very good, very accurate. It may be that your base metabolic rate has changed since it was last measured. It may be that you've simply estimated it based on something that you read, sort of a chart going, well, use your height and your weight to estimate your BMR. And your BMR, it really is the foundation of working out whether you're in a deficit or not, because it can vary wildly between, if you look at sort of someone who's built like me, I'm under 60 kilos, compared to a strong man, those BMRs are going to be wildly different. So if that is wrong, if that is out, that would explain where you wouldn't be seeing any progress. And the final piece here is that people quite simply overestimating the calorific burn from exercise. Now, this is something that is really common. It's something we touched on earlier. People thinking that as long as they do some light exercise, that they've got much, that it sort of gives them much greater calorific burn than it actually does. It could be that if somebody is using heart rate to track their workouts, that if they're going out at low intensity, heart rate does tend to over exaggerate calories burned at a low intensity and underestimate the calories burned at a higher intensity. So it's definitely not a perfect metric, and that can result in some changes there. And when we're looking at margins, I mean, generally speaking, for most triathletes for weight loss, if you're aiming for a calorific deficit of 100 calories a day, that's probably too close to the margin of error. You probably want to be looking at closer to 200, maybe 300 calories a day. Anything much more than that, and that's not really a sustainable way to lose weight, especially for an endurance athlete. You're not going to be fueled for your sessions. And if you are compromising on your fitness to lose a little bit of weight, that's not really going to benefit you on race day. Something I want to dissuade people from as well is the idea of having a cheat day. This is something that a lot of bodybuilders will do. You'll see them post on Instagram, oh, it's cheat day, and they'll have this huge stack of pancakes that they're eating, and all of these foods that you wouldn't necessarily go for. Now, this is generally aimed at people who are looking to build muscle, to bulk up, and for who calories are going to be vital. Somebody looking to build muscle want to be in a calorie surplus every day, because they want to give their body everything that's required to build and maintain muscle. And if they go and they have that blowout, then it won't affect them quite as much. Whereas you're an endurance athlete, you're on a performance journey as opposed to a body composition journey. And by having a big blowout cheat day, again, remember we're talking about calorific deficit, we're looking at over weeks and months. You can undo a lot of hard work by having a huge blowout one day. Now, this is not to say that you can't have little treats, that you can't have days out. That is definitely not what I am trying to say. What I'm saying is, don't have days where you approach it like nutrition doesn't matter. Now, for the final bit, I'm going to look at some of the more social and psychological elements of weight loss. This is something that I think is vastly underestimated. We can all sit there with our textbooks and say, yes, if you hit this calorific deficit, you should be this weight by this time. That's not how the world works, let's be honest. There are all sorts of things that can crop up and can derail us. This can be anything from going round to a family member and they offer you some biscuits, to a good friend's birthday at a curry house, or a wedding, or a big night out on the town. Okay? This is something that, this can appear, and as athletes, we need to be able to know how to navigate these situations, how to be sensible about it without being a complete killjoy. Now, if you go around to visit your mum and she offers you some cake, eat the damn cake, okay? Don't be rude by turning it down and saying you're looking after what it is that you're eating. Know that, okay, yes, you're having more calories in mid-afternoon than you normally would, and you just need to, compensate for that a little bit later in the day. This isn't the end of the world, just having a few extra calories. So the next possibility is a friend of yours having a big birthday meal at the local curry house. Now, don't be the guy who asks if you can go somewhere else with the lower calorie options, okay? You don't want to gain a reputation and not be invited next time. What you do need to do there is you do just need to be a little bit sensible when it comes to ordering the food. So, if using the example of going for a curry, yes, join in with the poppadoms when they arrive at the start. When it comes to ordering a main, just get yourself, you could go for a rice and a standard curry. You could go for an option that is like a tandoori, which will be a little lower in calories, less oils in there. And, go easy or don't have any extra sides. So if you normally go, I'll have a naan bread and some onion bhajis and 2 pints of Cobra, just be sensible. Just go, hang on, you know what, do I really need those? And by making choices like this, you can actually sort of almost halve the calories in a meal by not going for all the little sides and extras. Now, a night out on the town is an interesting one. Because I think another reason that a lot of people really fall down with their weight loss is they drastically underestimate the amount of calories that are in their drinks. Now, soft drinks are the biggest culprit here. People who get themselves into a habit of having a fizzy drink with some regularity, maybe once or twice a day, it's just something that they do. And there are a lot more calories in these than most people think. The biggest culprit is alcohol. The term beer belly, it does stem from somewhere. The body really doesn't know what to do with ethanol when it gets it. So if you consume ethanol, it goes, hang on a minute, this isn't a carbohydrate, a fat, or a protein. What do we do with it? And it sits there in the stomach, and the body goes, oh, actually, you know what? This is really high in energy. As ethanol is, alcohol is, so it goes, we can burn this and use it as energy. Now, as I'm sure a lot of you know, if your body has a choice between burning carbohydrate or burning fat, it will burn carbohydrate because it's easier to metabolize, and it's trying to look after those fat stores for when they might really need it in a survival situation. It's a similar thing with ethanol and carbohydrate. If your body has a choice between burning carbohydrate or burning ethanol, it's going to burn the ethanol. It wants to get it out of the body, really. It doesn't know what to do with it. So when you're consuming alcohol, not only are you getting all of these calories, but also your body is no longer burning carbohydrate because it's burning ethanol instead. This can often end up being a bit of a double whammy for us. Now, do I drink alcohol? Yes, I do, but very rarely these days. It is something that I'm not suggesting that you're a complete killjoy. You know, if you go to somebody's wedding, don't refuse to join in with the toast if you do drink, just because you're concerned about the calorific content of the sparkling wine. But do be sensible. Don't think, oh, I've earned this, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get absolutely smashed. Not only is that going to have an impact on your ability to train, but also you're going to take on a lot more calories than you realise. And again, if weight loss is your MO at the moment, then we do just need to be mindful of this and how many calories are in alcohol. And a really big point I want to make right now is not to get too hung up on this. Look, I appreciate that if you're listening to this, chances are you want to lose a kilo or two. And you know what? That's fine. I'm not going to stop you unless you're in danger of becoming underweight. But don't let it define you. Don't let it become greater than the joy that you get from your own training. It should be something that you feel enhances the quality of your life rather than something that dictates your life and your sense of self-worth. You need to look at your body and go, wow, as a triathlete, look at all these amazing things I can do. I can swim in open water. I can cycle for distances longer than people like driving. I can run faster than the vast majority of people on this world. But I've got this little bit round the middle and now I feel really awful. You can't afford to go down that kind of mindset. So yes, make sensible decisions. Try not to fall down these rabbit holes and pitfalls, but don't make your life miserable. It doesn't need to be that hard at all. It's simply a case of reducing the calories in your diet, increasing the amount of protein, increasing the amount of micronutrients that you're eating. You're not a boxer who's trying to make a weigh-in. You're not a bodybuilder trying to do an aggressive cut for a competition. You're not a Tour de France cyclist who's trying to get down to a weight for the racing on the mountains and trying to win one of the biggest races in the world. You are a triathlete who's trying to lose a bit of weight so that you feel better about yourself and so that you might race a bit faster. In the grand scheme of things, we can't afford for the tail to start wagging the dog. We can't afford for this to become the primary sort of motivator and issue in your life. So there we have it. These are the most basic principles of weight loss. I know that I've gone into quite a bit of detail, perhaps more detail than I needed to, but I know how frustrating it can be when somebody says, "Oh, it's simple. You just need to do A, B, and C." But realistically, try not to overcomplicate it too much because it's not going to help you in the long run. And I also want to remind you one of my favourite phrases: if it's stupid and it works, it's not stupid. If you have been using a different method than I've listed here and you've seen results from it, good for you. I'm not going to tell you that it doesn't work because clearly it does. Keep doing that. You may find that your body reacts differently to different things. Again, some people going back to sort of talking about different diets, paleo, intermittent fasting, all of this. Some people will find that they work really well from their body responds to that. Some will find that they really don't. It is, I'm not going to tell people to change something that's working for them. I'm just trying to help people sort of understand, take a little bit of sort of the woo-woo and the mystery out of it all. Hello everybody, this is Simon from the future again. I'm just popping in to say that I really hope you enjoyed the episode, you found it useful, you got some points you can take away from it. It is a subject which, sort of rather unusually, it's really quite simple in some respects, but incredibly complex in others. The theory, the science isn't too difficult, but the application and the behavioural change aspects of it is really quite challenging. So as I stated at the start, I went away and I created a course on the subject. It's available in video and text format, depending on your learning style. It's got 3 modules. One which is the principles of fat loss, where we look into the scientific side of things. We've then got fat loss strategies, where we look at how to implement these into our life. And finally, how body weight and fat loss apply to triathlon. I'm really proud of the course, and I hope that you'll take the time to have a little look and see if it's something you think might help you achieve your goals. There is a link down in the show notes where you can click through and you can learn a bit more about the course and sign up. And I just want to take the opportunity to wish you a happy new year once again. I hope this is a season full of great racing, training, and achieving all of the goals that you have in mind currently. Wishing you all the best, and I hope to see you again for the next episode.